Remember this. I am divorcing you right now." The husband threw the divorce papers onto the table without a shred of guilt. After I had just paid off his mother's $850,000 mortgage, I simply smiled and signed the document. Then I set my plan into motion. 1 hour later, my husband was fainting in hysterics. The atmosphere in the living room was incredibly tense as a certified cashier's check was placed onto the glass coffee table. The slip of paper was proof of a massive $850,000 payment to the bank. Delilah sat calmly in the single armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked across at her husband, Rick, and her mother-in-law, Eleanor, who were sitting opposite her. There was no smile on Rick's face. Instead, he crossed his arms over his chest with a look of pure contempt. Eleanor, however, stared at the piece of paper on the table with gleaming eyes. The heavy burden that had haunted the older woman's mind had finally vanished. Her luxury suburban estate would not be foreclosed on by the bank. The massive debt left behind by her late husband had been paid off today. However, instead of thanking her daughter-in-law for liquidating such a massive sum from her trust fund, Eleanor simply scoffed arrogantly. She picked up the bank receipt, inspected it for a moment, and tossed it back down roughly. She looked at Delilah with a degrading glare. In her eyes, it was simply a wife's duty to bail out her husband's family. Eleanor had never liked Delilah from the very beginning of the marriage. She always felt her son deserved a woman with far more social cachet, someone more obedient, and certainly someone financially beneficial who wouldn't demand anything in return. For years, Delilah had patiently endured the insults and verbal abuse from her mother-in-law. She had always stayed silent whenever Eleanor made snide remarks about her career or the way she dressed. But today, her patience had reached its absolute limit. Delilah had discovered a devilry rotten secret her husband had been hiding behind her back. Rick suddenly stood up. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. With a harsh motion, he threw it, letting it land right in Delilah's lap. Several documents slid out. They were legal divorce papers and an asset separation agreement, already drawn up by his lawyers and signed by Rick. He glared at Delilah with a sharp, victorious look. He felt he no longer needed her. All this time, he had only held off on the divorce because he needed her trust fund to save his mother's estate from bank seizure. Now that the debt was cleared, Rick felt completely free to do whatever he wanted. "Sign this right now. I'm divorcing you today," Rick declared with a booming voice, devoid of any hesitation. He stood haughtily, looking down at his wife as if she were trash that needed to be taken out. Delilah wasn't surprised. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, and she didn't beg, much to the disappointment of both Rick and Eleanor. The elegantly dressed woman slowly picked up the divorce papers. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon. Rick had prepared everything meticulously. He was demanding a divorce and an immediate separation of assets, even though almost everything the family owned had been bought with Delilah's personal money. Rick thought Delilah would break down and beg for forgiveness. Instead, she just gave a faint smile. That smile made Rick furrow his brow in confusion. "Did you think I was going to cry after you threw me away?" "You are dead wrong, Rick. I actually feel incredibly relieved to finally be free from a parasite like you," Delilah said, her voice perfectly calm but piercing. Her words made Rick's ears turn red with anger. Eleanor immediately interrupted, pointing a diamond-ringed finger at Delilah's face. "Keep your mouth shut. My son is sick of living with you. We already have a prospective daughter-in-law who is far better, much prettier, and actually respects her husband. Tiffany will be taking your place in this house immediately, so sign the papers and get the hell out." Hearing Tiffany's name, Delilah smiled again. Tiffany was a junior executive at Rick's firm, and the reason he had been coming home late for months. Delilah had hired a private investigator a long time ago. She had a mountain of evidence of their affair, from offshore bank transfers to photos of them at luxury resorts. But she had chosen to stay silent and gather her strength. She didn't want to act recklessly. She wanted to ensure that when she left, Rick and his family would experience a devastation they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Delilah adjusted her posture. She pulled a designer pen from her purse. Without a shred of hesitation, she signed her name on the dotted lines of the divorce and asset separation documents. Her decision was final. There was nothing left to save in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. Once finished, she placed the documents back on the table, right next to the bank receipt. Rick smiled with deep satisfaction. He felt he had won the war. He thought he had successfully manipulated Delilah into handing over her wealth for free. "Perfect. Now pack your things and get out. I don't want to see your face when I get back, Rick sneered. I'd leave even if you didn't ask. Thank you for freeing me from this hell. I hope you too enjoy your new life, Delilah replied casually. She stood up, smoothed out her skirt, and walked upstairs to the master bedroom. Inside, Delilah didn't need to pack much. She had already been secretly moving her valuables out over the past week. She simply tossed a few changes of clothes into a small Prada duffel bag. Her eyes swept the room that had been the silent witness to her suffering for the past few years. In this room, she had cried alone after discovering her husband was maxing out credit cards on another woman. But it was also in this room that she had meticulously plotted her revenge. She wasn't going to let these ungrateful people enjoy a single cent of her hard-earned money. After ensuring no important documents were left behind, Delilah walked out. As she descended the grand staircase, she saw Rick on his cell phone, his face glowing with joy. He was obviously calling Tiffany to deliver the good news about the divorce. Eleanor was already busy inspecting the living room furniture, planning how to redecorate the space to suit her new daughter-in-law's tastes. Delilah walked past them without another word. She stepped out of the heavy oak front door. The cool breeze hit her face, giving her a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. She walked toward her luxury sedan parked in the driveway. Before opening the door, she pulled her phone from her purse and hit a speed dial number. It was answered on the second ring. I've signed all the documents. They're kicking me out today, just as we predicted. Execute the main phase of the plan right now. Don't leave them a single loophole. Let them celebrate their stupidity for the next hour. Then, take absolutely everything. Delilah ordered, her voice firm and full of conviction. She hung up, got into her car, and started the engine. Looking through the rearview mirror, she stared at the sprawling estate one last time. A house she had once hoped would be a peaceful sanctuary was now just a monument to betrayal. Delilah smiled knowingly. She drove away, leaving behind the lies of the past and heading toward a future she had perfectly orchestrated. The countdown to Rick's destruction had begun, and she couldn't wait to see him begging at her feet. Delilah's departure was met with triumphant laughter inside the house. Rick and Eleanor felt as though a mountain had been lifted from their shoulders. Not long after Delilah's car left the driveway, another car pulled in. Tiffany walked through the front doors with a blooming smile. She was greeted warmly by Eleanor, who hugged her tightly as if she were a precious gemstone. Rick walked up to Tiffany, kissed her forehead, and led her to the very sofa Delilah had just vacated. The three of them celebrated their Liberation Day with pure joy. Rick ordered the housekeeper to bring out the most expensive bottle of champagne from the wine fridge. They toasted, laughing at how stupid Delilah was for paying off an $850,000 debt and walking away with nothing but a duffel bag. Tiffany leaned affectionately against Rick's shoulder, praising him for his brilliance in getting rid of his old wife without losing the family estate. Eleanor couldn't stop talking about her remodeling plans. She wanted new custom drapes, imported Persian rugs, and to throw a massive cocktail party to introduce Tiffany to their elite social circle. Time ticked by without them noticing. They were too absorbed in the fake paradise they had built for themselves. Rick bragged about how he had yelled at Delilah and thrown the papers in her face. Tiffany called him a real man who knew how to take charge. Eleanor kept thanking God that her son was finally free of a boring woman who didn't know how to serve her husband properly. They felt the world was entirely in the palm of their hands. Exactly 60 minutes after Delilah's departure, the celebration came to a grinding halt. The sound of heavy vehicle engines echoed in the driveway. A moment later, the doorbell rang aggressively, followed by loud, authoritative pounding on the front door. Rick frowned, annoyed that his victory lap was being interrupted. He got up, adjusted his suit jacket, and muttered under his breath as he walked to the door. Eleanor and Tiffany followed close behind, curious about the commotion. When Rick swung the door open, his eyes widened in shock. Standing on his porch was a group of uniformed county sheriff's deputies. In front of them stood a man in a sharp suit, holding a thick clipboard. The man stared at Rick with a cold, professional expression. Without missing a beat, he introduced himself as the legal representative for the lawful owner of the property, accompanied by the sheriff's eviction unit. "Good afternoon. Are you Richard Barnes?" the man asked, his formal tone slicing through the silence. "Yeah, that's me. I own this house. Who are you and what the hell are you doing on my property?" Rick snapped, puffing out his chest to assert dominance. The lawyer opened his clipboard and pulled out an official court document stamped with a legal seal. "We are here executing a writ of possession. Based on official court rulings and legal deeds, this property and the land it sits on belong entirely to our client, Miss Delilah. You and all occupants of this house have 15 minutes to vacate the premises. If you refuse, the deputies will remove you by force. Rick burst out laughing. He looked back at Eleanor and Tiffany as if this were the funniest joke he'd ever heard. You've got the wrong address, pal. Or my stupid ex-wife tried to scam you. I literally just saw the bank receipt for this house. The $850,000 was paid off this afternoon. The divorce papers are signed. This is my mother's house, not Delilah's. You better leave before I call the cops. The lawyer didn't flinch. Instead, he shoved a copy of the documents into Rick's desk. Read it yourself, Mr. Barnes. That $850,000 was not a mortgage payoff. Your mother's loan defaulted months ago. The bank officially foreclosed on the property. The money paid today was for an REO cash purchase. Miss Delilah bought this house directly from the bank at auction, using her sole and separate funds, right after your asset separation agreement went into effect. Rick snatched the paper with trembling hands. His eyes darted across the legal jargon at lightning speed. His heart hammered against his ribs. What he was reading was undeniably real. The deed of transfer was registered solely under Delilah's name. The asset separation agreement he had eagerly signed alongside the divorce papers explicitly stated he had zero claim to her newly acquired properties. Delilah had trapped him. She let him sign away his rights to her wealth first, and only then did the bank officially transfer the title to her. This is impossible. This is fraud. She has no right to do this. This is my childhood home. Mom, tell them this is your house, Rick yelled, the color draining from his face. He turned to Eleanor, whose entire body was now shaking violently. She tried to step forward and grab the lawyer's arm. Sir, please stop joking. I'm an old widow. This is my late husband's house. My daughter-in-law is a vicious liar. She forged these papers. You can't just kick me out into the street, she wailed, her face pale as a ghost. We are just following court orders, ma'am. The status of this property is absolute. If you want to dispute it, get a lawyer. But right now, this eviction is happening. You have 10 minutes left. Grab your personal belongings, only what you can carry. All the furniture and fixtures inside belong to the estate purchased by Miss Delilah. The lawyer stated coldly, signaling the deputies to move in. Tiffany, realizing how rapidly the situation was deteriorating, started backing away. Her beautiful face was now painted with panic. She stared at Rick, who looked like a man who had just lost his mind. The burly deputies stepped into the foyer, securing the perimeter to ensure the occupants didn't steal anything that wasn't theirs. Rick tried to fight back. He shoved a deputy, screaming and cursing Delilah's name. His resistance was futile. Two deputies instantly grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back, and marched him out the door. Eleanor screamed hysterically, refusing to walk, until a female deputy was forced to physically escort her out. Rick stood on the driveway of what used to be his home, the whole world feeling alien to him. He watched as the deputies locked the heavy wrought iron gates. His vision blurred, the arrogance and entitlement that had defined Heim evaporated in seconds, replaced by sheer panic and a skyrocketing heart rate. He watched his life crumble into dust. Just as the deputies snapped the padlock onto the gate, Rick's chest tightened. He gasped for air, his vision went black, and he collapsed onto the concrete, triggering a hysterical scream from his now homeless mother. Exactly 1 hour after Delilah left, their palace of lies collapsed, Krushenjit's architects. Rick's consciousness slowly returned, accompanied by a blinding, throbbing pain in his head. He felt the rough, hot asphalt beneath his back. The glaring afternoon sun stung his face as he blinked his eyes open. The first thing he saw was his mother's tear-streaked face. Eleanor was shaking his shoulders, sobbing uncontrollably. Her wails shattered the quiet of the exclusive suburban neighborhood. Rick blinked hard, trying to piece together what had just happened. The memory of the sheriff's deputies, the eviction notice, and the cold smile on his ex-wife's face flashed back like a nightmare. The bitter reality hit him harder than the concrete. He had truly been thrown out of his own home. He forced himself to sit up, holding his spinning head. He looked around. The towering gates of the estate were locked from the inside. Private security guards hired by Delilah were already stationed behind the fence, ensuring they couldn't break back in. Right next to him on the curb were a few suitcases and trash bags containing his and his mother's clothes, tossed out unceremoniously by the deputies. There was no dignity left. A few yards away, Tiffany stood with her arms crossed, looking incredibly pissed off. She tapped her designer heel against the pavement, making absolutely no effort to help Rick. Rick, what are we going to do? Where are we sleeping tonight? I am not going to be a homeless beggar. Do something. Call the police. Sue that ungrateful bitch. She stole your father's house. It isn't fair. Eleanor whined, violently tugging at Rick's shirt collar. Rick took a deep breath, trying to suppress the massive panic attack building in his chest. He needed to look strong and powerful, especially in front of Tiffany. He couldn't let his ego shatter in front of the woman he had just been bragging to. With great difficulty, he stood up and brushed the dirt off his suit. He helped his mother to her feet. Calm down, Mom. Stop crying like a peasant. This is Aminor's setback. Delilah might have snuck this house out from under us, but she forgot I still have my assets. I'm the CEO of a major firm. We aren't going to go broke just because we lost one old house. Rick projected his voice loudly so Tiffany could hear. He reached into his pocket and smiled with relief as his fingers brushed against a key fob. He pulled it out and pointed toward his luxury Range Rover parked under a large oak tree just outside the property line. It was the ultimate symbol of his success. The car he used to flex on his business partners. Look, we still have the Rover. We're leaving right now. We'll check into the Four Seasons tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm heading straight to the office. There's a multi-million-dollar venture capital fund clearing tomorrow. Once I withdraw it, we'll buy a mansion twice the size of Delilah's dump. Let's get in the car, Rick ordered, strutting confidently toward the SUV. Hearing this sweet promise, Eleanor's crying subsided. Tiffany's sour expressions softened into a slight smile, and she hurried to catch up with Rick. Hope began to bloom again, but Rick froze in his tracks. A heavy-duty tow truck suddenly turned the corner, reversing aggressively until it was right in front of his Range Rover. Three burly men jumped out of the truck. Completely ignoring Rick, they immediately hooked chains and wheel lifts to the SUV's tires. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Don't touch my car. Drop it right now or I'm pressing charges for Grand Theft Auto. Rick screamed, sprinting toward the Rapaman, his face flushed with rage. The man who appeared to be the boss walked over to Rick, holding a clipboard. He looked Rick up and down with absolute disgust and handed him a piece of paper. We have a legal order to repossess this vehicle. This car is registered as corporate property, Mr. Barnes, not your personal vehicle. And according to an emergency shareholder meeting held this morning, all liquid and movable corporate assets are to be seized immediately to cover the company's financial deficits. The man explained in a deep, gravelly voice. Rick's eyes bulged. His heart raced. Shareholders? What are you talking about? I'm the sole owner of that company. I have total control. You've got the wrong guy. You haven't checked your emails, have you, Mr. Barnes? The majority shares of your company were leveraged as collateral for your massive personal debts. A few days ago, a major private equity firm bought out all your debt and seized the equity. That equity firm is controlled by Miss Delilah's family trust. Simply put, your ex-wife now owns your company and all its assets, including this SUV. You were officially terminated as CEO an hour ago. The repo man pointed to the Range Rover, which was now fully hoisted into the air. Rick's legs turned to jelly. He stumbled back, his eyes vacant. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He realized the catastrophic magnitude of his own stupidity. For years, he had been secretly taking out massive corporate loans to fund his lavish lifestyle and buy Tiffany expensive gifts. He had cooked the books so Delilah wouldn't find out, but she knew everything. She had quietly executed a lethal corporate takeover, bought his debt, and was now liquidating his entire life without mercy. The tow truck's engine roared, driving away with the last shred of Rick's pride. Eleanor screamed, collapsing onto the asphalt once again. She couldn't believe her golden boy was now utterly destitute. Tiffany stared at the empty parking spot in disbelief. The illusion of unlimited wealth that had blinded her was shattering before her eyes. So you're actually broke, Rick? You massive liar? You told me you were loaded? You promised me a life of luxury. Look at you now. You're nothing but a pathetic failure kicked out of his own home, Tiffany shrieked, her beautiful face contorted with disgust. Tiffany, please, just listen to me. It's a misunderstanding. Delilah is just playing games. I still have contacts. I can secure that funding tomorrow, Isware. Trust me, we'll bounce back. Please, just come with me to find a hotel for tonight, Rick begged, trying to grab her hand. Tiffany swatted his hand away viciously. Go with you? To do what? Stand on the side of the road waiting for a miracle? I am not going to live in poverty with you. I regret ever wasting a second of my time on a loser like you. Rick looked at her with wounded eyes. In a desperate panic, he grabbed her arm, pleading, swearing he would prove her wrong the next day at the office. After a humiliating, exhausting argument, Tiffany finally relented, though she scowled the entire time. She agreed to help them find a cheap motel for the night, making it very clear this was his absolute last chance to prove he wasn't completely ruined. That night, the three of them were forced to rent a dingy, cheap motel room on the outskirts of town, spending the first night of their ruined lives with empty stomachs and chaotic minds. The morning sun offered no warmth to Rick, who was consumed by sheer panic. He woke up from a terrible night's sleep on a rock-hard mattress in a cramped, musty motel room. His mother's snoring and Tiffany's endless complaints had buzzed in his ears all night. Today was do or die. He had to get to his office, meet with his primary venture capital investors, and secure the multi-million-dollar project funds he had promised Tiffany. Using the last bit of cash in his wallet, Rick called an Uber X to take them to the downtown financial district. During the ride in the stale-smelling sedan, Eleanor complained endlessly about the heat and her aching back. Tiffany sat in the corner, arms crossed, staring out the window in total silence. Her usually flawless appearance looked ruffled and dull. Rick tried to tune them out and focus on damage control. He smoothed down the wrinkled suit he had slept in, trying to maintain an aura of authority, though he looked anything but. He kept telling himself there was no way Delilah could legally lock him out of his own operations overnight. The Uber pulled up to the sleek high-rise building where Rick's firm occupied a premium floor. Rick hopped out, followed by Eleanor and Tiffany, but as he approached the plaza, he stopped dead in his tracks. A highly unusual scene was unfolding. Dozens of his employees were standing around the courtyard, looking bewildered. The glass entrance to his floor was locked down. Several large, intimidating private security contractors stood guard. Bright yellow tape bearing the seal-off federal investigators was plastered across the glass. The crowd was buzzing, employees frantically asking each other what was going on. Rick shoved his way through his own employees. Move! Get out of the way! What the hell is going on here? Why aren't you at your desks? Who ordered this lockdown? Rick bellowed, desperately trying to assert dominance. The employees turned to look at him, but none showed their usual deference. Instead, they glared at him with suspicion and contempt. Before anyone could answer, the glass doors unlocked from the inside. Two security guards stepped out, followed by a woman Rick recognized instantly. Delilah walked out with striking elegance, radiating immense power. Her face was calm, stripped of any emotion, but her eyes locked onto Rick like a hawk spotting its prey. They aren't working because this company's assets are frozen pending a full federal investigation, Rick. And you have zero authority to order anyone around here anymore. Delilah's voice rang clear across the plaza. Rick recoiled. Delilah, what the hell are you doing at my office? Get out before I call the cops. You stole my house and my car, and now you're trying to ruin my business? He screamed, pointing a shaky finger at her. Delilah smiled knowingly. She walked down the steps, stopping a few feet away from him. Call the police? Be my guest. In fact, they're exactly who we're waiting for. Did you forget I am now the majority shareholder? Last night, the forensic auditing team I hired found highly incriminating evidence. Forged financial reports, corporate embezzlement for personal use, and phantom projects you fabricated to defraud investors. That's bullshit. My lead investors trust me completely. They're wiring millions today for my new development. They won't listen to your cheap lies. Rick puffed his chest out, clinging to the last shred of his ego in front of Tiffany and his staff. Those investors you're so proud of? They work for me, Delilah stated cleanly. The venture capital firm that backed you is a subsidiary of my family's trust. We purposely funneled that money to see how far your greed would go. And I was right. You used project funds to fuel your personal vices, partying at luxury hotels, buying diamonds for your mistress, and paying off your massive gambling debts. The crowd of employees erupted into shocked whispers. Rick's face drained of all color. His hands began to shake violently. He glanced at Tiffany, who now looked absolutely terrified. If everything Delilah said was true, he was totally dead. There were no millions. There were no projects. There was only a mountain of debt and the threat of federal prison. Before Rick could even process a way out, another commotion broke out at the edge of the plaza. A group of rugged, menacing men in leather jackets and dark clothes marched toward the building. Some were carrying baseball bats. They were collectors for the shady private lenders and underground bookies Rick had secretly borrowed from to maintain his fake billionaire lifestyle while waiting for the project funds. "That's him! Don't let that scumbag run!" One of the massive men yelled, pointing a bat right at Rick. The thugs broke into a sprint. Terrified, Rick scrambled backward, literally hiding behind his elderly mother and Tiffany. Eleanor shrieked as the terrifying men closed in. Delilah just stood there, watching the show with icy detachment. She crossed her arms, savoring every second of the downfall of the man who had exploited her pure intentions for years. "Where's our money, Rick? The deadline was yesterday. If you don't have the cash, we're taking whatever you own, or we're breaking every bone in your body," the lead enforcer roared, grabbing Rick by his ruined collar and yanking him forward. Rick thrashed around in pure terror. "Please, just give me a little more time. I swear I'll pay it back. Tiffany, Tiff, help me. Give them the savings account I set up for you. Just pay them off. I'll pay you back double, I swear," Rick cried, tears streaming down his face as he looked desperately at the woman he had worshipped. Tiffany looked at Rick with utter disgust. She took several steps back, distancing herself from the chaos. She flipped her hair and sneered. "Savings? What are you talking about? That money is mine. It's my compensation for wasting my youth on a useless fraud like you. Handle your own mess. I have absolutely nothing to do with you from this second forward." Without a drop of pity, Tiffany turned on her heel and speed-walked away from the plaza. She didn't even look back as Rick screamed her name until his voice cracked. Eleanor wailed, watching her son get dragged away by furious loan sharks. Rick begged for a mercy he would never receive. Delilah simply turned her back, walking elegantly into the building she now owned, leaving Rick to drown in the destruction he had engineered himself. Phase 2 was complete. The violence in the plaza escalated rapidly. Rick took several brutal punches to the ribs and face from the furious collectors he had strung along for months. He was tossed around like a broken rag doll. His suit was ripped, his face was rapidly swelling with bruises, and blood trickled from his split lip. Eleanor screamed from the edge of the courtyard, too terrified to intervene and save her son. The employees who had once taken orders from him simply watched from afar, none stepping in to help their former boss. After hearing Delilah's revelations, they felt he was getting exactly what he deserved. In a moment of pure adrenaline, as a massive thug raised a bat to swing at his head, Rick ducked blindly. Summoning every last ounce of survival instinct in his battered body, he shoved past a gap in the circle of men and bolted. He ran like his life depended on it, sprinting away from the corporate plaza, ignoring the searing pain radiating through his body. He darted down alleys, hopped over dirty chain-link fences, and sprinted aimlessly to lose his pursuers, who were cursing loudly behind him. His lungs burned, his chest felt like it was on fire, and he lost one of his expensive dress shoes in a puddle, forcing him to run half barefoot over hot, broken pavement. After running for blocks, Rick finally collapsed in a desolate, dead-end alleyway. He leaned against a grimy brick wall, gasping for air. His body shook violently from exhaustion and terror. With trembling, bloodied hands, he reached into his pocket. Miraculously, his iPhone was still there. Though the screen wash-hattered from the beating, it still worked. The only lifeline Rick could think of was Tiffany. He convinced himself she still had a conscience. After all, he had bought her Rolexes, designer bags, and wired hundreds of thousands of dollars into her accounts. He figured she would at least let him crash on her couch and get a meal until the heat died down. Rick forced himself to stand. Limping in one shoe, he dragged himself down the long city sidewalks. He kept his head down every time a car passed, terrified someone would recognize him in this pathetic state. The trek to Tiffany's luxury high-rise condo was agonizing. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, baking his sweaty, bruised skin. Extreme hunger and thirst gnawed at his stomach. But he didn't have a single dollar to buy a bottle of water. He relied purely on his desperate need to reach the woman he believed to be his soulmate. When he finally reached the towering glass condominium where Tiffany lived, Rick didn't dare go through the front lobby. He knew the doormen were strict and would instantly throw out a bloodied, half-shoeless vagrant. Instead, he hid in the manicured bushes near the private resident garage exit, keeping his eyes glued to the driveway. He waited for hours in agonizing discomfort. His stomach growled loudly, but Hare refused to give up. He knew she had to leave the building eventually. His desperate prayers were answered by late afternoon. From a distance, he spotted Tiffany strutting out of the private lobby. A relieved smile broke through Rick's bloody lips. But that smile instantly vanished when he saw she wasn't alone. She had her arm wrapped tightly around an older, distinguished-looking man in a bespoke suit. Tiffany laughed flirtatiously, resting her head against the older man's shoulder with extreme intimacy. They were walking toward a sleek Bentley Continental parked in the VIP zone. The sight was like a knife twisting in Rick's gut. He couldn't believe the woman who had abandoned him in a crisis just hours ago was already rubbing up against another man in broad daylight. Jealousy and fury overrode the pain in his body. Rick stumbled out of the bush's sand, limped toward them. "Tiffany, what the hell is this? Who is this old creep? You said you loved me, and not even a day after I lose my money, you're ready hunting your next sugar daddy?" Rick shrieked, his voice raspy and breathless. Tiffany and the older man spun around in shock. The man frowned, looking at Rick with intense disgust. "Who is this filthy bum, baby? How does he know your name?" the man asked, taking a step back to avoid the stench of sweat and blood radiating from Rick. Tiffany's face went rigid, but within a split second, she shifted her expression to one of pure, condescending mockery. She looked Rick up and down. "I don't know this crazy homeless man, honey. Probably just a junkie who wanders around the neighborhood. Let security handle it. Let's just go. I don't want to catch whatever disease he has," she said, her voice ice cold and utterly remorseless. Hearing her deny him, Rick's blood boiled. He lunged forward to grab Tiffany's arm. But the older man was quick. He shoved Rick hard in the chest. Because Rick was already physically decimated, that simple push sent him flying backward. He crashed hard onto the asphalt, aggravating his bruised ribs. He groaned in agonizing pain. "You manipulative snake. You drained my accounts, ruined my marriage to Delilah, and threw me away like trash the second I went broke. Give me my money back. Give me back the jewelry. It's mine," Rick wailed from the ground, clawing at the empty air. Tiffany walked over to where Rick lay. She leaned down slightly, staring into his eyes with a sickening mix of hatred and pride. "Did you really think I cared about you, Rick? You are a gullible idiot. I only got with you because I knew your ex-wife was a trust fund baby. I was just bleeding your assets dry. Every sweet thing I ever said to you was a lie. Now that your net worth is zero, why would I waste my time? Figure your own life out and stop following me around like a stray dog." With those venomous words, Tiffany turned and gracefully slid into the passenger seat of the Bentley. The heavy doors shut, the engine purred, and the luxury car glided away, carrying off the last of Rick's delusions and whatever dignity he had left on the pavement. Rick stared blankly at the road. Tears finally spilled over his bruised cheeks. His chest felt crushed, as if a boulder were sitting on his lungs. Tiffany's betrayal hurt infinitely worse than the physical beating from the loan sharks. The bright afternoon sky suddenly grew dark. Thick black clouds rolled over the city, bringing a biting, chilling wind. Moments later, heavy rain began to pour. A torrential downpour washed over the streets. Rick remained sitting on the asphalt, letting the freezing rain soak his bruised body. His shredded clothes clung to his skin. He had absolutely no energy left to even stand up and find shelter. His life was officially over. He had lost a devoted wife, massive wealth, a luxury home, a respected career, and the mistress he thought was perfect. Amidst the downpour, he felt a faint vibration against his thigh. His shattered phone lit up, displaying an incoming call from his mother. With stiff, freezing fingers, Rick pulled the phone out and pressed it to his ear over the sound of the pounding rain. "Rick, where are you, sweetie? I'm so cold, I'm so scared. I ran away when those men started hitting you. I'm sitting on a piece of cardboard outside a closed bodega. My stomach hurts so much. I haven't eaten since yesterday. Come get me, Rick. I can't survive on the streets like this." Eleanor's voice was hoarse, punctuated by pathetic, heartbreaking sobs. Hearing his mother's whimpers, Rick broke down completely. He pulled his niece to his chest in the pouring rain. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know where to take her. On this cold, lonely street, the horrifying reality set in. He and his mother were now truly homeless, with nowhere to go. The arrogance and entitlement they had proudly worn like armor had turned around and annihilated them. The punishment for their sins had begun in the cruelest way possible, and this was only the beginning of their long, suffering road. The night bled into morning agonizingly slowly. Rick and Eleanor survived the horrific night, sleeping on flattened cardboard boxes in a secluded alleyway. Their clothes, soaked from the rain, had dried on their bodies, leaving them smelling like wet dogs and itching terribly. Their stomachs roared constantly. Not a single bite of food had passed their lips in nearly 48 hours. Eleanor looked ghostly pale. Her face was hollow, and her frail body shivered in the morning breeze. Rick sat hugging his knees next to her, staring at his filthy, blistered foot from walking miles with only one shoe. His mind was entirely blank. He had no contacts, no secret accounts, and absolutely no idea how to get even a few dollars for a slice of pizza. As the sun rose higher and warmed the pavement, Eleanor weakly tugged at Rick's sleeve. She looked at her son with pathetic, pleading eyes. The extreme arrogance that had defined the older woman for decades had vanished entirely, replaced by profound, bottomless despair. She couldn't take the harshness of the streets for another second. She remembered the plush mattresses, warm duvets, and gourmet meals Delilah used to provide. Rick, listen to me. We can't just sit here and starve to death. There's no other way. We have to go to Delilah. We have to go to her new house. She was your wife. She used to respect me. That woman has a soft heart. She won't be able to stand seeing us suffer like this. We have to swallow our pride, beg on our knees if we have to, just so we can get a roof over our heads. Eleanor wheezed, her breath rattling. Rick shook his head slowly. The last microscopic drop of pride in his system made him resist. Did you forget how cold her eyes were yesterday? She planned this whole thing. She trapped us. She is not going to take us back after what we did. If we go there, she's just going to humiliate us and kick us out. I can't take any more humiliation, Mom. Do you want us to die in the gutter? Forget your stupid pride. Pride isn't going to buy us a meal. It's not going to give us a bed. I am an old woman. My bones are aching. If you won't take me, I'll crawl there myself to beg for her mercy. Eleanor threatened, struggling to stand up, nearly collapsing back onto the pavement. Seeing his mother almost faceplant, Rick quickly caught her arm. His heart broke seeing the woman who raised him in such agony. Hesitantly, he nodded in defeat. He helped her walk slowly, embarking on the grueling trek to the wealthy gated community where Delilah had purchased her new estate. The journey took hours. They walked at a snail's pace. They were forced to scavenge half-empty water bottles from trash cans just to wet their parched throats. Pedestrians stared at them with a mix of pity and disgust, giving Thema wide berth as if they carried the plague. By midday, they finally reached a towering wrought iron gate decorated with ornate gold crests. Behind the gate sat a massive three-story modern mansion surrounded by pristine landscaping. It was exponentially larger and more luxurious than Rick's childhood home. Private security guards in sharp suits stood at the guardhouse, on high alert. Rick and Eleanor stood outside the gate, looking like specks of dirt against the opulence of the property. Their filthy, torn clothes were a stark contrast to the wealth radiating from the estate. Rick stepped up to the intercom. "Excuse me, sir. Please tell Miss Delilah, father, husband, and mother-in-law are here to see her. We just need to speak with her for a minute." A guard walked up, eyeing the two vagrants through the bars with intense suspicion. He didn't touch the gate release. "Sorry, Miss Delilah gave strict orders yesterday. No one enters without authorization. Especially the two people whose faces are printed on the Do Not Enter flyers in the security booth. You two are permanently banned from this property. I suggest you leave before we use force to remove you." Hearing the rejection, Eleanor lunged at the iron gates, wrapping her hands around the bars. She dropped to her knees on the hot asphalt and began to wail at the top of her lungs. She intentionally made her shrieks as loud as possible, hoping they would carry into the main house. She cried hysterically, screaming Delilah's name, begging for mercy, bringing up family ties, and the memory of her late husband. She put on the performance of a tragic, abused mother. Rick knelt beside her, his head bowed, unable to make eye contact with the guards, who stared at them with utter disdain. Eleanor's hysterical crying echoed for 15 minutes, until the massive front doors of the mansion finally opened. From a distance, Delilah emerged, walking slowly and gracefully down the driveway. She was flanked by two massive bodyguards. She wore a chic, tailored silk loungewear set, her face glowing and a faint smile on her lips. The contrast between her and the human trash pile outside her gates was staggering. Delilah stopped a few feet from the gate. She looked at her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law with zero emotion. Her eyes were as cold as Arctic ice. She didn't order the guards to open the gates. She simply stood there, letting their on bars serve as the permanent boundary between her perfect life and their ruined one. Delilah, my darling daughter-in-law, open the gate, please. It's Mom. I'm starving. I am so sorry for everything I did in the past. I know I was cruel to you, but deep down, I love you so much. Please, let us in. Just give us some food and a place to sleep. We've lost everything. God will bless your kind heart if you forgive us. Eleanor sobbed, shoving her hands through the iron bars, desperately trying to reach the hem of Delilah's silk pants. Rick gripped the bars tightly. Swallowing the very last of his pride, he pleaded in a broken voice, Delilah, please, give me one more chance. I know I was a stupid idiot for betraying you and falling for that gold-digging whore. She dumped me, Delilah. She left me the second I lost my money. I promise I'll change. I'll work as your butler, your janitor, anything. Just take us back. Please don't let my mother die on the streets. Delilah listened to their desperate pleas in silence. Not a flicker of pity crossed her eyes. When they finally stopped talking, Delilah slowly reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small digital audio recorder and pressed play. A crystal-clear conversation played from the speaker. It was the voices of Eleanor and Rick, sitting in the living room of their old house a few months prior. Rick, you have to get rid of that woman. Her father left her a massive trust fund. If we just sit around waiting for her to give us handouts, we're never going to be rich. Eleanor's venomous voice echoed from the recorder. I talked to a specialist in the city. We can get an untraceable powder to slip into her food every day. It's odorless and tasteless, but it slowly causes organ failure. She'll get violently ill and waste away. When she dies, you'll legally inherit everything as her husband. That's a brilliant idea, Mom. I'm so sick of living with that stuck-up bitch anyway. I'll get the powder, and we'll make sure the maid mixes it into her smoothies every morning. We'll be in control of her entire fortune in a few months. Rick's voice replied, eagerly agreeing to the murderous plot. Delilah hit stop. The air outside the gates went dead silent. Eleanor and Rick turned ashen. Their bodies convulsed as if they'd been struck by lightning. They had absolutely no idea their lethal, top-secret conversation had been recorded by Delilah. For months, Delilah had known they were plotting to slowly poison her to death. But she had stayed quiet, gathering evidence to flip the board at the exact right moment. You invoke God's name to beg for my mercy. When you yourselves plotted a heinous, slow murder to rob me of my father's inheritance, Delilah said, her voice flat but carrying a lethal edge. I honored you as a mother, and your payment was a plan to destroy my organs from the inside out. And you, Rick, my own husband, who swore to protect me, agreed to literally kill me so you could play billionaire with your mistress. Delilah gestured to one of the security guards. The guard walked around the back of the booth and returned with a dirty bucket filled with pitch-black, foul-smelling mop water. Delilah took the bucket smoothly. Without warning, she hurled the filthy water straight through the iron bars. It splashed violently over Rick and Eleanor, soaking them completely. The disgusting water dripped from their hair, making their already pathetic state infinitely worse. The stench of mildew and dirt filled their nostrils. Eleanor gagged, spitting out the dirty water that had gotten into her mouth. Rick flinched violently. Here are the tears of mercy you asked for. Lick them off your own faces, Delilah commanded triumphantly, looking at them like they were repulsive insects. That final, devastating humiliation snapped the last thread of Rick's sanity. His rage exploded. With bloodshot eyes and veins popping from his neck, Rick screamed like a maniac. He tried to scale the 10-foot iron gate to attack Delilah, his muddy hands slipping on the metal. Before he could get high enough, one of Delilah's massive bodyguards lunged forward. Through the bars, the guard grabbed Rick's outstretched right arm. With a brutal, practiced twist, he wrenched Rick's arm violently in the opposite direction. A loud snap of breaking bone echoed in the air, followed immediately by an agonizing, blood-curdling scream from Rick. He lost his grip and fell back onto the pavement, clutching his limp, broken arm. The excruciating pain made him roll around on the ground, completely ignoring his mother, who was shrieking in terror at the gruesome sight. Delilah turned her back, refusing to look at the pathetic display any longer. She walked calmly back toward her mansion. Make sure they never show their disgusting faces near my property again. If they come back, hand that audio recording over to the FBI for conspiracy to commit murder. She ordered the guards before the heavy front doors slammed shut, leaving Rick and Eleanor Torote in an endless nightmare on the unforgiving streets. Tiffany walked out of Fifth Avenue's flagship designer stores with a massive smile on her flawless face. Her hands were full of shopping bags containing haute couture, the latest stilettos, and sparkling jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She walked gracefully toward the Bentley, waiting for Hare at the curb. The older man, her new protector, greeted her with a warm hug and a kiss on the cheek. Tiffany felt her life had reached the absolute peak of perfection. She felt like a genius for abandoning Rick at the exact right moment before he went broke. To Tiffany, love meant nothing without extreme wealth. She considered herself incredibly lucky to snag a sugar daddy who spoiled her rotten. That evening, they dined at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan. The older man looked at her with feigned adoration. Holding her hand across the candlelit table, he began his lethal manipulation. "Baby, you are the most special woman I've ever met. I want to prove how serious I am about us. Tomorrow morning, I'm transferring several real estate assets and a massive offshore cash fund into your name. I want your future guaranteed. All you have to do is sign a few transfer documents as a formality for the LLCs," the man said, his voice dripping with sincerity and fake devotion. Hearing this, Tiffany's eyes practically turned into dollar signs. Blinded by pure greed, without thinking twice or reading the fine print, she eagerly agreed. The next morning, in the penthouse suite, the man handed her a massive stack of legal contracts. Tiffany took a pen and signed every single page he pointed to, imagining herself as New York's newest billionaire, possessing wealth that would put Delilah to shame. She didn't suspect a thing. Greed had completely lobotomized her common sense. A few days of pure bliss went by. The older man kissed her goodbye, claiming he had to fly to Europe for a few days on business. Tiffany didn't mind at all. She enjoyed having the penthouse to herself, inviting her socialite friends over to flaunt her new wealth. But the fake paradise didn't last. Early one morning, while Tiffany was getting a facial treatment in the living room, a deafening pounding echoed at the door. Before she could even stand up, the heavy oak doors were breached with a battering ram. A dozen heavily armed FBI agents and SWAT team members swarmed the penthouse. They scattered across the rooms, securing the perimeter and seizing electronics. Tiffany screamed in absolute terror. Her face went pale as the agents glared at her intensely. The lead FBI agent walked up to her, holding an official federal arrest warrant. "Tiffany Evans, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit international wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering for a transnational syndicate. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the agent barked, reading her Miranda rights as his voice echoed through the luxury condo. Tiffany shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "Wait, you have the wrong person. I didn't do anything. I just live here. All of this belongs to me boyfriend. He's away on business." "You need to arrest him, not me," she cried, hyperventilating. The agent smiled coldly and held up a thick folder, the exact documents Tiffany had signed days ago. "The boyfriend you're referring to is a federal fugitive who uses shell companies to evade authorities. And according to these documents, which you signed of your own free will, you are the sole guarantor, CEO, and liable party for these phantom LLCs. The offshore accounts holding the stolen money are all in your name. The lease on this penthouse and the cars are all under your name with massive leveraged debt. You were the fall guy, Miss Evans. You are now legally responsible for over $40 million in defrauded funds." Tiffany's world disintegrated. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the cold marble floor. She finally realized the older man was a master con artist looking for a naive idiot to act as his legal meat shield. The diamonds he gave her were cubic zirconia. The papers she proudly signed were debt assumptions and confessions of corporate liability. Her own greed had marched her straight into a bottomless abyss. The feds didn't give her a second to process it. Two female agents yanked her to her feet, slapping cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists. She was dragged out of the penthouse, looking like a total wreck, paraded in front of her wealthy neighbors who whispered and recorded her on their phones. At the federal holding facility, Tiffany was tossed into a bleak, terrifying interrogation room. She sobbed, screaming that she had been conned. But the investigators didn't care. Her notarized signatures were undeniable proof. After grueling hours of interrogation, Tiffany was marched down the hall toward a temporary holding cell. As she walked down the dim corridor, she froze. In another room, sitting handcuffed to a metal table, was a man looking absolutely atrocious. His face was a patchwork of purple bruises, his clothes were filthy rags, and his arm was in a makeshift sling. It was Rick. The ex-boyfriend she had thrown away had ended up in the exact same federal holding center, arrested after his violent altercation with the loan sharks and subsequent investigations into his corporate fraud. Rick lifted his heavy head. His eyes locked onto Tiffany's swollen, terrified face. All her beauty and arrogance were gone. Rick stared at her with deep hatred, but also an undeniable, sick satisfaction. He smirked, mocking the stupidity of the woman who thought she had played him, only to fall into a Holton times deeper than his. Tiffany looked down at the floor, hiding her tears of regret. The massive federal sentence awaiting her for crimes she didn't even benefit from would be the longest nightmare of her life, and she knew absolutely no one was coming to bail her out. Time marched forward mercilessly, bringing the most terrifying day of Rick's life. The main courtroom at the U.S. District Court was packed to the brim with spectators, journalists, and interested parties. The air was frigid and tense. The sharp crack of the judge's gavel echoed loudly, signaling that the sentencing hearing was underway. Rick sat at the defendant's table, his head hanging low. The man who was once a cocky, tailored executive now looked pathetic. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He had lost 30 pounds, his face was pale, and his eyes were hollow. The bruises from the loan sharks had healed, but the internal wounds of losing everything bled constantly. In the front row of the gallery, Delilah sat perfectly upright. She wore an elegant, understated designer suit that screamed quiet wealth and absolute independence. Her face radiated peace. There was no gloating, only a quiet desire to see justice served to the man who promised to protect her, but tried to destroy her instead. In the back corner of the room, Eleanor sat hunched over, looking miserable. The old woman wept uncontrollably, clutching a damp tissue, mourning the destruction of her only child. The federal judge began reading the extensive list of charges. His baritone voice left no room for doubt. Rick was charged with multiple felonies: bank fraud, corporate embezzlement of massive funds, and wire fraud against his investors, all meticulously uncovered by Delilah's legal team. Rick had tried to defend himself through a cheap public defender. He claimed the financial discrepancies were mistakes caused by extreme corporate pressure. He played the victim, even trying to blame Delilah for monopolizing his finances and driving him to desperation. But his pathetic defense was obliterated by the U.S. attorney and Delilah's lawyers. The prosecution didn't just present offshore bank statements and forged ledgers. They played security footage from the luxury hotels where Rick spent this time. A shocking new fact was revealed, making the entire courtroom gasp. Rick hadn't just been out late sleeping with Tiffany. The footage clearly showed Rick in a hotel parking garage, conducting a hand-to-hand drug transaction with a known dealer. Toxicology reports from his arrest confirmed he was heavily addicted to cocaine. This discovery not only guaranteed maximum sentencing for the white-collar crimes but tacked on severe narcotics charges. Hearing the undeniable proof laid out in open court, Rick couldn't even lift his head. He buried his face in his trembling, handcuffed hands. He knew he was doomed. Every lie he had ever told had been surgically dismantled. He glanced back at Delilah, desperately hoping for a sliver of pity. But she just stared straight ahead, her eyes reflecting absolute, unyielding resolve. After a lengthy reading of the sentencing guidelines, the judge made his ruling. The courtroom went dead silent. The judge adjusted his glasses, glared down at Rick, and spoke with booming authority. Based on the overwhelming evidence, witness testimonies, and the severity of the financial destruction caused, this court finds the defendant guilty on all counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, corporate malfeasance, and possession of a controlled substance. I hereby sentence the defendant to 12 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole, and order full financial restitution for all damages caused. Bang, bang, bang. The judge's gavel struck the sound block. The sound hit Rick like a lightning bolt. 12 years behind cold steel bars. His worst nightmare was now his permanent reality. His knees buckled under the table, his body losing all function. He slouched in his chair, his mouth hanging open in shock. From the back of the room, a hysterical shriek pierced the silence. Eleanor shot up from her seat, thrashing around, screaming Rick's name. She begged the judge, blamed herself, and screamed for Delilah to help them. The immense psychological pressure was too much for her frail body. Eleanor passed out cold, collapsing onto the courtroom floor. Paramedics rushed in to stabilize her. Court was adjourned. The U.S. Marshals immediately grabbed Rick's arms, hauling him up to drag him back to the holding cells. As he was pulled past the gallery, Rick dug his heels in, stopping right next to Delilah. Tears streamed down his shallow cheeks. He reached out with his cuffed hands, trying to touch her, to beg for forgiveness. Her bodyguards instantly blocked him. Delilah slowly stood up, looking at her ex-husband from inches away. No anger, no hate, just lethal calm. Your destruction isn't my doing, Rick. This is the harvest of the greed, lies, and betrayal you planted yourself every single day. You threw away my loyalty for cheap thrills, and now you have to swallow the consequences. Don't ever expect forgiveness for the pain you and your mother caused. Serve your time, and realize just how small and useless you really are, Delilah whispered. Her voice is soft but piercing straight through Rick's soul. She turned away, walking out of the courtroom with immense grace, never looking back. Rick was dragged through the back doors by the marshals, wailing in agony down the long, dark hallway. He regretted every single choice that turned his life to ash. Justice had been served, and the traitor's karma was paid in full. The air inside the federal penitentiary was frigid and damp, chilling him to the bone. The smell of rust mixed with cheap industrial bleach permeated the narrow, poorly lit corridors. The heavy footsteps of corrections officers echoed off the thick, soulless concrete walls. It was the absolute end of the line, a graveyard for regret and despair. Delilah walked down the corridor with incredible poise. There was no hesitation in her step. She wasn't there to offer forgiveness. She was there to permanently close the darkest chapter of her life, and to ensure the man who broke her trustfully understood the depth of the hell he now lived in. A guard escorted Delilah into the visitor's room. It was stark and depressing, filled with scratched metal tables divided by thick, bulletproof plexiglass, and steel stools bolted to the floor. Delilah sat down, placing her designer clutch in her lap, sitting perfectly straight. She stared at the heavy steel door on the opposite side of the glass. Her heart beat at a steady, calm rhythm. She had mentally prepared for this moment for months. Soon, the heavy door groaned open. 2 guards led in an inmate shuffling his feet heavily. It was Rick, but the man behind the glass looked nothing like the arrogant, tailored CEO who had thrown divorce papers in her face. Rick looked horrifying. His head was shaved bald, his once muscular frame had withered away into skin and bones, buried under a baggy khaki prison uniform. His face was covered in a patchy, unkempt beard. His cheeks were severely sunken, and dark, heavy bags hung under his eyes, screaming of sleep deprivation and unimaginable psychological torture. Rick sat down at the metal stool, his hands shaking. When he looked up and realized who was sitting across from him, his eyes immediately welled with tears. The fragile emotional walls he had built to survive in prison shattered instantly at the sight of his ex-wife. Delilah looked so beautiful, so pristine, radiating a life force that sharply contrasted with his walking corpse appearance. Rick's lip quivered. He picked up the black telephone receiver on the wall with a weak hand. He waited for Delilah to do the same. Delilah picked up the phone. Before she could say a word, Rick's desperate sobs flooded the earpiece. "Delilah, please help me. I am begging you, get me out of this cursed place. I can't survive another day in here. The inmates torture me every night. The food makes me sick and I freeze on a concrete slab every night. I'm sorry, Delilah. I am so sorry I betrayed you. I'll give you my life if you just talk to the prosecutors, pull some strings, get me out of this hell." Rick wept, his voice cracking and pathetic. Delilah listened to his pathetic begging with a stone-cold face. Not a single muscle moved. She let him empty his soul until he ran out of breath and was reduced to quiet hiccups. When silence finally fell, Delilah spoke. Her voice was crystal clear, calm, and cut straight to Rick's core. "You want me to pull strings? You seem to forget that your crimes weren't just against me. They were against federal banks, your shareholders, and the United States government. You aren't in there because of me. You're in there because your own hands locked you inside that cage." Rick shook his head desperately. Tears fell onto the metal counter. I know I was wrong. I was blinded by money and that bitch's lies. But please, remember the good times we had. Remember our vows. I was your husband. I swore to protect you. Just give me one last chance to prove I can be a good man. You're my only hope. None of my friends or partners will even take my calls. I am so alone and so scared in here. Hearing him invoke their vows, the corner of Delilah's mouth twitched upward into a chillingly cold smile. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a thick envelope. Slowly, she took out an 8x10 glossy photograph and pressed it flat against the plexiglass, right in front of Rick's face. Rick squinted to see the image, and his eyes instantly bulged. His crying stopped, replaced by a paralyzing shock. The high-definition photo showed an elderly woman in a horrific state. She was wearing filthy, torn rags stained with motor oil and dirt. She was crouched in an alleyway behind a city diner, digging through a commercial dumpster for half-eaten scraps of food. The old woman's arms were skeletal and caked in grime. Her wrinkled face looked exhausted and starved. There was no denying it. The wretched woman in the photo was his mother, Eleanor. The woman he had spoiled, the woman who had demanded to live like a queen in Delilah's house, was now fighting rats for survival. Because of her toxic reputation and her part in the attempted murder plot, not a single relative had taken her in. Look closely, Rick. This is your mother now. After you went to federal prison, she knocked on every relative's door begging for a couch to sleep on. But all the doors slammed in her face. Everyone knows you two plotted to poison me for me trust fund. No human being wants a monster like that in their home. Now, she bounces from bus stops to dumpsters, just trying to survive another day, Delilah said, her tone utterly flat, yet every word hit Rick like a sledgehammer. Rick screamed hysterically, slamming his fists against the bulletproof glass. No, this isn't real. You're lying. You did this to her. Help her, Delilah. Save her. Punish me all you want, but put my mother in a home. She's too old. She's going to die out there, Rick roared, drawing the attention of the guards in the room. Delilah lowered the photo and slid it back into her purse with calculated slowness. She looked deep into Rick's eyes, which were now swimming in an abyss of regret. You begged me to save your mother. Where was that compassion when she was sourcing tasteless toxins to slip into my morning coffee? Where was your conscience when you agreed to murder me slowly just so you could play billionaire with your mistress? Your mother is reaping exactly what she sowed. Just like you. Rotting in this cage. Rick couldn't speak. He gasped for air, his throat burning. The 1-2-year sentence felt like a paper cut compared to the agony of knowing his mother was living like a feral animal because of his own greed. The crushing guilt swallowed his sanity. He realized he had traded a diamond for cheap glass. Delilah stood up. The meeting was over. She had gotten exactly what she came for. She had delivered her final message flawlessly. Live with this ghost for the rest of your life in here, Rick. Consider your mother's suffering on the outside and your torture on the inside as the penance for what you tried to do to me. Don't ever expect to hear my name again. This is the absolute end. Delilah hung up the receiver. She turned and walked toward the exit, her steps light and unburdened. Behind the glass, Rick wailed, screaming her name, slamming his forehead against the metal table in sheer, agonizing regret, until the guards had to physically drag his limp body back to his cell. Delilah walked out through the heavy prison gates. She inhaled the crisp, fresh air. A genuine smile graced her lips. Her past was permanently buried behind those concrete walls. Now, it was time to step into the bright future she had built, entirely free from the parasites that once drained her. 6 months had passed since the judge's gavel sealed the fate of Delilah's betrayers. Time had brought incredible, massive changes for the resilient woman. Inside a grand ballroom of a luxury hotel, bathed in the morning sunlight, the atmosphere was warm and full of hope. Today was the official launch of a non-profit foundation founded and funded entirely by Delilah. The foundation focused on providing legal aid, psychological counseling, and financial independence grants for women who were victims of domestic abuse, infidelity, and financial abandonment. The ballroom was decorated with lush floral arrangements that filled the air with a soothing fragrance. Hundreds of guests, including top-tier lawyers, psychologists, and women's rights advocates, sat waiting for the keynote address. On the brightly lit stage, Delilah stood tall, radiating immense grace and authority. She wore a stunning, impeccably tailored suit that highlighted her success and survival. Her eyes sparkled with peace. A genuine smile never left her face as she looked out into the crowd. In the front rows sat dozens of women who were slowly rebuilding their lives, looking at Delilah with profound admiration and gratitude for saving them from their own nightmares. Delilah adjusted the microphone and began her speech. Her voice was calm, yet incredibly powerful. Life's journey sometimes forces us down dark roads, lined with the thorns of betrayal. There are times when we feel the world is collapsing, and our pure intentions are met with toxic cruelty. But through that suffering, we learn a priceless lesson. Patience and a meticulous strategy are the greatest weapons to flip the script. We must not allow ourselves to be destroyed just because someone else didn't know how to value our loyalty. Through this foundation, I want to guarantee that no woman will ever feel alone or powerless when her rights are stripped away. We will rise together stronger, smarter, and completely independent. Thunderous applause erupted, shaking the ballroom. Cheers of support echoed, breathing new life into every soul in the room. Delilah concluded her speech with a triumphant, deeply satisfied smile. She stepped down from the stage, embraced by her peers and respected by everyone in attendance. Her life was now perfect and deeply meaningful. She had alchemized her trauma into a massive force for good. She had proven that intelligence and grace could effortlessly crush deceit and greed. She had found a true happiness that money could never buy. Meanwhile, in another corner of the state, a horrifyingly different scene played out. At a massive county landfill, mountains of rotting garbage stretched as far as the eye could see. Swarms of flies buzzed thickly in the foul-smelling air. Amidst a pile of wet, sludge-covered trash, Eleanor struggled to rip open a black garbage bag with her shaking hands. Her clothes were shredded rags, her face was smeared with mud, and she was dangerously emaciated from severe malnutrition. She dug through rotting vegetables and maggot-infested leftovers, fighting off feral rats just to find something to put in her stomach. As her hands finally grabbed a half-empty plastic bottle of murky water, she collapsed weakly onto the trash pile. She chugged the dirty water greedily, entirely uncaring of the taste. As she paused to catch her breath, she looked up toward the distant highway. Standing tall by the road was a massive digital billboard. On it was a picture of Delilah, looking breathtakingly beautiful and radiant, promoting her new women's foundation. Seeing her former daughter-in-law glowing like a queen on that billboard, Eleanor's chest tightened in excruciating pain. Tears carved tracks through the grime on her cheeks. The regret ripped her soul to shreds. She used to be the lady of a manor, served gourmet meals in a mansion paid for by that very woman. But because of her wicked greed, she was now a starving scavenger dying in a literal pile of garbage, with absolutely no one to care if she lived or died. In a different yet equally horrifying place, Rick was paying his dues. Inside the damp, urine-soaked bathroom of his prison block, Rick was on his hands and knees. Armed with a tiny scrub brush with a snapped handle, he was forced to clean the disgustingly filthy shower floors. He was skeletal, his body mapped with fresh, purple bruises. His uniform was soaked in toilet water. Every time he paused to catch his ragged breath, a heavy, steel-toed boot kicked him square in the ribs. "Keep scrubbing, you lazy piece of shit. Get that floor shining. If you don't finish in 10 minutes, you don't eat tonight, and I'm dumping a bucket of ice water on your mattress." A massive, heavily tattooed gang leader barked, holding a makeshift shiv. Rick groaned in agony, swallowing the tears that constantly threatened to spill from his hollow eyes. He went back to scrubbing with violently shaking hands. He had to swallow his pride whole, submitting to daily torture and humiliation from inmates who treated him like absolute garbage. There was no more arrogant Rick. There was no CEO. There were no luxury cars or millions of dollars. It had all evaporated into a never-ending nightmare. As he desperately scrubbed the feces-stained floor, the image of Delilah's serene, victorious smile flashed in his mind. It tortured him with a regret so profound it could never be paid off. Back at the sunlit gala, Delilah stood by a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the lush gardens. The late afternoon sun bathed her face in a warm, golden glow. She sipped her champagne, feeling a deep, vibrating peace in her veins. The heavy burdens of the past were completely lifted. The loyalty she gave that was betrayed had been avenged with an unforgiving karma. Her master plan had been executed flawlessly, leaving not a single loose end. From today until the end of her days, the long road ahead was paved only with goodness, peace, and the absolute happiness she deserved. Delilah took a deep breath, smiled up at the clear blue sky, and welcomed the new chapter of her life as the absolute queen she was born to be. The story ended with absolute satisfaction where truth carved its own path, and greed was buried alive in eternal suffering.